Hello, my name's Mark Saunders, and this is a YouTube video presentation on how to diagnose your research philosophy, and it uses the tool HARP, heightening your awareness of your research philosophy, and it links to the Research Onion. It's one of a series of YouTube presentations on my YouTube channel, Mark Saunders on Research Methods, and you can see more details of this on the bottom left-hand corner of every slide with the link. In this presentation, we're going to be focusing on HARP, heightening awareness of research philosophy, and its 6 sections. And we're going to be using these to diagnose your research philosophy, your ontological assumptions, your epistemological views, your axiological views, the purpose of research, what you understand by meaningful data, and what you understand by nature, structure, and agency. And in doing that, we'll be able to look at 5 widely used research philosophies within business and management research: positivism, critical realism, interpretivism, postmodernism and pragmatism. And we're going to look at how we both use HARP and also how we interpret the output from it. And of course, at the end there'll be a reference but also a link to a free download of chapter 4 of the book Research Methods of Business Students, which I co-wrote with Phil and Adrian, and in this it has at the end of the chapter a copy of the tool as well. So let's start off by looking a little bit more about HARP, heightening your awareness of your research philosophy. It was developed by a good friend of mine, Alexander Bristow, and myself, and it's a reflexive tool. By that we mean it's a tool to help you think about your research philosophies and explore them. It's just so a starting point, and what it will do, it will show how your views of those 6 areas we talked about on the previous slide map onto these 5 philosophies which are frequently used in business and management research. And when you use it, you'll find your views may be similar to more than one of these philosophies, and that's fine. And just a quick note, the HARP and all the associated materials are copyright to myself and Alexander Bristow, so please don't reproduce them, just give them away. Thanks so much. Each of the 6 sections in HARP have 5 statements associated with them. So the ontology section has statements about assumptions about reality, and we'll be looking at how you agree or disagree with these. Similarly, for the epistemology section, it has statements about the assumptions of acceptable knowledge. The axiology section has assumptions about the role and values in research. The purpose of research has statements about why it is undertaken and for whom. The meaningfulness of data section looks at what makes data meaningful and has statements on that. And finally, the structure and agency section has statements about the nature of structure and agency, how a human behaviours and choices determined. Now, in preparation for you actually doing HARP, what I'd like you to do is to pause the video in a moment and then get a piece of paper, and on the left hand side note down the numbers 1 through 30, and these are going to link to the 30 statements which you're going to actually say whether you strongly agree, slightly disagree, or strongly disagree. And eventually what we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving a number to each of your answers. So where you strongly agree, we're going to give it a +3, agree a +2, slightly agree a +1, slightly disagree a -1, disagree a -2, and strongly disagree a -3. We're now going to record your agreement or disagreement in relation to the 5 statements on the nature of reality, or your ontology. And when we do this, what I'd like you to do is on the sheet of paper you've got, against each statement record whether you strongly agree, slightly disagree, or strongly disagree. And within that, you've got the numbers there already written on your sheet of paper. So if you were to strongly agree with the statement, organisations are real, just like physical objects, you'd write +3 next to question 1. If, however, you slightly disagreed with question 2 and the statement there, you would write a -1 next to that. Now I'd like you to pause the video, note down your answers against each of those statements, and when you finish, start the video up again. Well done on recording your first 5 feelings in relation to the first 5 statements. What we're going to do now is look at your views on what is acceptable knowledge. And again, we have 5 more statements, and notice now these are statements 6 to 10 on the numbers you've put on your sheet of paper. And again, against each of the statements, I'd like you to record whether you strongly agree, slightly disagree, or strongly disagree using those code numbers. When you've done that, we can move on to the next one. So pause now, do the recording, and then we'll move on to the next slide. I'd like you now to do the same with your views on the role of values in research, in other words, your axiology. And again, I'd like you to record your response against each of those statements, how you feel, whether you strongly agree, slightly disagree, or strongly disagree. And this is for statements 11 through 15. Now pause the video, note down how you feel against each of those statements with a +3 if it's strongly agree, and so on. And then when you've done that, start the video again. The next slide looks at your views on the purpose of research. And again, I'd like you to record the information like you've done on the earlier ones. Strongly agree through strongly disagree, using +3 for strongly agree, -3 for strongly disagree. And just as a recap, for statement 16, the purpose of research is to discover facts and regularities and predict the future events. If you slightly disagree with that, you would write down -1 against number 16 on your piece of paper. Now pause the video, write down your views on each of these 5 statements, and when you've done that, start the video again. Now we're going to look at your views on what is meaningful data. And so just a quick reminder, for question 21, the statement which says things that cannot be measured have no meaning for the purpose of research, if you were to agree with that, you would write next to 21 on your piece of paper +2. As before, pause the video, write down your answers to each of these 5 questions as either +3, +2, +1, -1, -2 or -3, and when you've done that, start the video again. We're now looking at your views on the nature of structure and agency, and we're doing exactly the same as before, and this is the last 5 questions. So for each of these statements, whether you strongly agree, slightly disagree or strongly disagree, write down your answers as before with the codes +3 through to -3, depending on how you feel. And now pause the video, do this, and when you've done it, start the video again. We're now at the stage where we look at your answers and turn them into HARP scores, which showed how closely your reviews relate to each of the 5 major philosophies used in business and management research. And this is one where we have to pay careful attention to make sure we don't make any mistakes. So for positivism, I would want you to add up the scores for question 1, question 6, question 11, question 16, question 21 and question 26. For critical realism, you add up your scores for questions 2, 7, 12, 17, 22 and 27. Questions related to interpretism, which you need to add up, are questions 3, 8, 13, 18, 23 and 28. Questions which show your views in relation to postmodernism are questions 4, 9, 14, 19, 24 and 29. And finally, questions which show how closely your views relate to pragmatism are questions 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 and 30. So let's now get you to add these up. So total your HARP answer scores as in the table above to give yourself a total score, and you can do this on the same piece of paper you've been using up to now. In this slide, we have an example which shows how somebody has totaled up their scores for each of the 5 philosophies, and there we can see. So for positivism, their score comes out as a 6, for critical realism as a 5, for postmodernism as a 4, and pragmatism 5. So their highest scores are for 2 philosophies, pragmatism and critical realism. And this is not unusual. Very often when people do HARP, they have a preference or they relate closely to 2 of the philosophies. But we can also see here that the same person does not really relate to interpretivism or postmodernism or indeed positivism. And we could actually, if we wanted to, plot these on a radar graph, which gives a very nice visual representation. And what we can see is from the centre of the radar graph, as we look outwards, we can see that pragmatism and critical realism are much closer to how this respondent felt in relation to their own philosophical views than either postmodernism, interpretism or positivism. So it starts to get you to think about, why did I feel like that? And to do that, you could actually go back and look at your answers to each of the statements and start to understand your own views better. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to leave you with a few reflexive questions to think about things a bit more. So look at your own scores for each of these 5 philosophies. Do you have an outright winner? So in other words, is there one of those 5 philosophies which the score is way high? For some people it gets into 17s and 18s, with other scores actually going down to 0 or even into minus numbers. Or perhaps you may be like in the previous slide, having similar scores for 2 or more of the philosophies. It differs. But once you've done that, just say, oh, that's me. Look back to your answers and the statements that you were actually agreeing with strongly or disagreeing with, and say, why do you think this is? Then to the philosophies which you disagree with most, the ones with the lowest scores, look again. Why do you think this is? Look again at those statements and talk about this with colleagues. Actually start to understand your own philosophy better. And I think this will be really helpful for you as you move forward in your research. In terms of looking at references for this, I've only given you one reference, which is to the chapter 4 in the textbook Research Methods Business Students, which I wrote with Phil and Adrian. Now, this is available for free download and with full permission of the publisher, either on ResearchGate, which is the top right QR code, or on academia.edu, which is the bottom right QR code. And this will give you a direct link to actually be able to download it and use it. Happy reading, happy using HARP, and please do think carefully about what you've answered and what it means for you in the way you've done research.